Hello and welcome back to the Troutman Pepper Battery and Storage Podcast. I am your host, Bill Derasmo, but today we have stepping in as a guest host my colleague in our Atlanta office, Josh Combs. Josh will be interviewing our guest. We're very pleased to have Laurel Meeks from Duke Energy. Laurel is the Director of Energy Storage Development at Duke, and I will now hand the baton to Josh. Josh, take it away.
Thank you, Bill, and good morning, Laurel. I'm really excited to do the podcast and to chat all things energy storage development with you. So good to see you.
Thanks so much for having me.
I'd like to first talk a little bit about, let the audience know your background and your path that you took to arrive at Duke Energy, I guess, and to the energy storage space. So if you could talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So I am currently in a director role leading the storage development team. And I've been with Duke for 5 years working on storage development. So I've seen the program grow from its infancy. And prior to working at Duke, I did an energy MBA at Keenan Flagler. Before that, I worked in energy efficiency. So I've had a long history of a passion for the clean energy industry. And I got an undergraduate degree from Carolina as well. So double Tar Heel, I could not stay away from Chapel Hill.
And unfortunately or unfortunately, somewhere along that path, we had the chance to meet each other and work together. So I'm definitely happy to have you here and want to dig into some of the developments and projects that Duke is doing across the country. But if you could just talk a little bit about the overall strategy and focus of the storage development team and your role in as it relates to Duke Energy's future.
Sure. Our team of project developers is focused on the development and deployment of standalone storage across our regulated jurisdictions. Duke Energy operates its electric utility business in 6 states, and we have the opportunity to deploy standalone storage as a capacity and energy resource and a reliability resource in all of those jurisdictions. What we do well is strategically site storage to maximize the grid value and lower the end cost to customers. On a day-to-day basis, what that looks like for us is originating projects, negotiating procurement contracts, land contracts, interconnection agreements, and generally making sure that projects are buttoned up so that we can turn them over to our construction execution partners.
And that focus and strategy in the regulated utility space, talk a little bit about as it relates to planning and operations of a regulated utility. How does the storage development team and your work fit into that process?
Duke Energy has made a corporate commitment to transition its electric generation fleet to net zero carbon by 2050. And doing so means we're going to have to change the electric generation resources that are currently on the grid. And we'll see a varied fleet, a very diverse generation fleet, including low-cost, intermittent renewables. And those are necessarily going to be balanced by energy storage in multiple forms. So that's where we fit into the puzzle piece of the net zero transition and also supporting our grid reliability and customers' energy needs.
And I think that you said there were several jurisdictions. What are the regulated jurisdictions in which your team works on developing these projects?
We operate all across the eastern seaboard. We have operations in the Midwest, in Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky, in the Carolinas and North and South Carolina, and also in Florida.
Okay. And I'm sure that in each of those states and service territories, there are probably different considerations and different ways in which storage is being developed. I'd like to talk a little bit about the specific aspects of development within each of those states that you mentioned. So starting with North Carolina, what are some of the drivers of storage development in North Carolina, and what is the company's kind of early experience developing in North Carolina?
This is a great question because each jurisdiction has different legislation, policy, and economics. But we are all balancing the same Duke Energy corporate commitment of net zero by 2050. In North Carolina, we've been a leader in storage development, and you can see that through legislative frameworks, including House Bill 951, that directly aligns with the Duke Energy corporate goal of reliably, cost-effectively serving customers while also providing direct line of sight to carbon intensity goals for the electric generation fleet. In North and South Carolina, one of the first drivers of investment in energy storage was the Western North Carolina's modernization plan. This was a first example of a public and private partnership to deploy clean technology. For the Western North Carolina's modernization plan, Duke found significant community support to defer a planned transmission line run through upstate South Carolina by using new energy solutions, including retrofit and reconfiguration of a planned combined cycle and the addition of battery and solar. Today, we have 13 megawatts of battery energy storage in service in the Western Carolinas, with an additional 60 megawatts of energy storage planned, along with 9 megawatts of solar. Solar and storage is actually planned to be sited adjacent to that now constructed and operating combined cycle in Nashville. And more is to come in the Carolinas. That is for sure.
And for that first initial wave through the Western Carolinas modernization plan, my understanding is that there was a microgrid project that was a part of that policy process. Laurel, could you talk a little bit about the Hot Springs project that came out of the Western modernization plan?
Absolutely. Hot Springs Microgrid is a showpiece project, certainly, because it is an inverter only microgrid in a rural and remote community in North Carolina. Of course, that did support the Western North Carolina's modernization plan that had benefits for both North and South Carolina customers. Interestingly, this was a way for us to use battery energy storage technology to support a local reliability need while also using the system to dispatch for the benefit of all Duke Energy customers across our balancing authority. What Hot Springs Microgrid did was actually defer needed investment in a new transmission line running to a rural or on the grid isolated town of Hot Springs in North Carolina that was experiencing a high amount of loss of normal utility service. Today, that microgrid dispatches every day for the benefit of all Duke Energy customers as a production asset. But if that town of Hot Springs, that community experiences a loss of normal utility service, the microgrid kicks in and islands that community and provides backup power so that businesses can continue to operate, homeowners can still use their power.
Yes, that's very good information. And I think that the inverter only aspect of that is something that was definitely unique about that project. And you mentioned, I think 13 megawatts are currently in service in North Carolina. I've heard you and other folks in the industry talk about storage as kind of serving as a Swiss Army knife for utilities. And you talked about some of those potential benefits that storage can provide for customers. Can you just dig into that a little bit more about how some of these initial projects have validated some of the benefits and use cases for storage for regulated utilities?
We love that example. Storage is a Swiss Army knife, and that's because storage can provide so many different grid services. It can dispatch as a capacity resource. It can do energy arbitrage, which buys down the cost of operating the fleet, charging when power is low cost and widely available, and then discharging when energy demand is at the highest. Storage can also serve as a cost effective way to defer investment in distribution solutions and transmission solutions. And so, a great example of that is our continued investment in battery energy storage at the distribution scale within a microgrid configuration to increase local reliability where other traditional solutions really aren't applicable or feasible for customers. But we have experience dispatching, as I previously mentioned, these batteries to the benefit of the bulk electric grid, right, as a capacity resource and doing energy arbitrage. So we're testing that. We're getting better and better at dispatch and operations every day. But I think some of these early investments and use cases really are validating that those grid services are able to be served by batteries.
And this is obviously particularly important as the entire industry is undergoing a transition, the clean energy transition. So definitely using storage as a complementary resource during this time, I'm sure provides great benefits to the utility and the customers.
Yes, storage can be complementary to many different grid resources. I did mention the necessity of balancing low cost intermittent renewables with energy storage, but let's not forget that energy storage can be a way to smooth the operation and lower the cost of dispatching and operating fuel resources like natural gas plants and even nuclear. For example, we have a really amazing resource in our fleet today, our Bad Creek pumped hydro facility that was actually built to complement our nuclear fleet and was dispatched at some point in the past to charge when nuclear was overly abundant and then discharge when the power grid needed it the most.
And similar to the way that we talked about North Carolina, could you talk a little bit about Florida to the extent that there are particular nuances or differences in the way that the company is developing and deploying storage in Florida?
Florida is a state that's currently delivering low cost, reliable power, but that has a diversifying fleet, including clean tech. We have solar on the grid today in Florida, and the 10-year site plan, which is the integrated resource plan or capacity model for Florida, has selected more solar and intermittent renewables as a part of the ideal capacity fleet. And so that's going to need to be balanced again by storage. So this year, we saw that 10-year site plan did select several battery energy storage systems, including a standalone storage asset and storage that's paired with solar.
And how does the company, as you're approaching, so if there's a need identified for storage, how does the company then or determine whether it's going to be solar paired with storage or just a company or just standalone storage without another resource?
Well, that's a great question for an integrated resource plan modeling expert. We have really amazing analytical experts at our company who determine what the appropriate inputs are for our capacity expansion models or our integrated resource plans. And they run these models over and over again to determine how we need to cost effectively serve our growing energy demand with a variety of potential capacity resource types, whether that be storage, solar, natural gas, wind, etc. One of the distinctions that I'd like to call out with storage is that it does have the ability to create or make, it does have the ability to complement solar and make solar a dispatchable resource and therefore could be a capacity resource. There is a place and a capacity expansion plan for both solar paired with storage and standalone storage. And ultimately, those modeling experts, those analytical experts will determine the right ratio.
Great. And moving to the Midwest to Kentucky or Indiana, which interestingly enough, I'm originally from Kentucky. So there's part of Kentucky that considers itself to be the Southeast, but I realize that it's a part of your Midwest service territory. But could you just talk a little bit about the storage development in those areas and what you're seeing in those service territories?
Well, Josh, we love Kentucky. We operate in Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky, and it's important to note that we only own electric generation in Indiana and Kentucky. And so, as a part of a capacity expansion model, storage would be a part of a solution within those two states. We are seeing the Midwest determining how storage can be a part of that cost effective portfolio. And they're contemplating how to do that within the context of the energy transition. We do have 3 operational battery energy storage systems today online in Indiana. I'm very proud of that fleet. There are 3 approximately 5 megawatt 1 hour duration assets that are currently dispatching into the MISO market and that have the opportunity and ability to microgrid or island critical loads.
And when you say critical loads, for those in the audience who may not know what that means, could you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Of course. An example of that would be our Camp Atterbury battery energy storage system, which again is operating and dispatching for the benefit of all Indiana customers into the MISO market, but has that opportunity to isolate itself from the electric grid in the event of that loss of normal utility service and back up Camp Atterbury, which is an Army National Guard base. So really critical. We're maintaining the reliability of the grid for customers and we're maintaining and enhancing national security. Who doesn't want that?
Absolutely. And when you think about the future, so in the battery chemistry and what we're seeing going forward, and I first should ask, are all of the batteries that we talked about here or the storage projects been lithium ion? That's been the battery chemistry?
This is such an important question. I did refer to our existing pumped hydro resources earlier on our chat, and it's an important point to make because we have decades long experience operating energy storage. In the short term, Duke Energy plans to invest in short duration lithium ion battery energy storage. And so that's what my team is working on today. And there's technical reasons, there's commercial reasons why that short term investment will be in lithium ion. But looking beyond the 2020s into that commitment for net zero energy by 2050, we will need to invest in other types of energy storage technologies, including long duration storage technologies.
And one of the quotes that I had read that you had said previously that I feel like I would like for you to elaborate on because I feel like it perfectly speaks to the future. You said that, it's really exciting to not only reimagine the grid of the future, but reimagine sites that have been traditionally used for power plants as a part of that transition. And I think that that has implications both in terms of federal legislation that we've seen and just the overall future of the industry. So could you talk a little bit about that and as it relates to the future of Duke Energy's storage program?
We have the opportunity to be really creative and really smart in how we plan for the transition of our electric fleet into the future to be able to provide customers the energy that they need at a low cost and with increasingly low carbon intensity. As an example of what I talked about in that particular quote, let's talk about the Asheville plant. Asheville, North Carolina is its own balancing authority. So it's a very small balancing authority that was previously served by one legacy coal plant. That coal plant has retired and was replaced by a combined cycle, a very highly efficient combined cycle. And we stated that we plan investment in solar and storage on site. The intention is to construct that and put that in service to the benefit of customers in 2026. How neat is it to see a site with a retired coal plant revitalized to not only continue reliably serving the region, but with less carbon intensity? I'm very excited about those projects, and I think the community is as well. A bonus there is that now we have the opportunity to buy down the cost of that clean energy investment at that site with the investment tax credit rules that were recently passed by the federal government, where if you cite clean energy technology projects on the location of a retiring coal facility, you get an ITC bonus adder. So you're buying down essentially 10% more cost of the project for customers using that federal ITC tax incentive.
It's interesting that you mentioned that. And we talked about me being from Kentucky. I know that in a lot of these areas, my family's from Eastern Kentucky, those communities have been built around and dependent upon coal plants. And so to be able to go back and invest into those communities, I feel like is important and an added benefit to your work.
Absolutely. We have to be very sensitive about our communities and stakeholders while we're embarking on the clean energy transition. And one of the ways that we can be sensitive is retraining, retooling the workforce, right? And reinvesting in the communities that have legacy energy infrastructure and making sure that we maintain a tax base for those communities. And so there is a local benefit to investing in new combined cycles, new solar, new storage at these sites, and making sure that community has the opportunity to work at those facilities and has access to that tax based contribution as well.
And I know that I think some of the work in Florida may be siting projects in those communities. You talked about that helping with the cost effectiveness. So leveraging those federal opportunities or other opportunities, how are you using those incentives as a way to continue expanding energy storage across the service territories?
You're asking a little bit more about strategic siting, which is so important to touch on. And there's two ways to think about strategic siting. One is to maximize grid value at a particular project location. That may mean stacking grid values. Let's take the example of hot springs, where we're going to serve as a capacity and energy resource for the bulk electric system and a local reliability resource. So it's a project that does two things at once. The other way to look at strategic siting is, where can we site a project to minimize cost to the customer? And that means looking at these brownfield sites within energy communities that are applicable for that ITC bonus adder. It buys down the cost of that investment. Additionally, if we're looking at existing sites, we already own the land. We don't need to buy more land. We already may own interconnection facilities, substations, and transmission lines. So if we can get a lower cost interconnection there, that's also a way to save money for our customers.
Absolutely. And just kind of to round things out, you said, I think that you've been in the storage development space and on this team for 5 years. As you look 5 years ahead or 10 years ahead, what do you hope is the future for storage at Duke Energy? And what do you see on the horizon?
Well, let's talk about the workforce of the future, because it's always on my mind. And my team is always in need of talent, and this industry is always in the need of talent. And so when I look to the future, what gets me excited is building a new workforce. And that is really within many functional roles. I support a business development function, but we need smart minds, strategic thinkers working in finance and engineering and project management, technology development within the storage industry. And I don't want to leave this subject without hitting on the importance of diversity within that workforce for the storage industry. It's really critical so that a diverse workforce can provide the best creative solutions for where we need to get as a electric utility and as an industry.
That's great to hear. And I know I've been fortunate to work with you and your team and to see some of the development and the execution of these projects, and really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us today. And I don't know if our expert Bill wants to hop in and say a final word about anything that we've talked about, but I know that we certainly enjoy you being here and appreciate your time, Laurel.
I really appreciate you hosting me, Josh. It's been a pleasure to work with you. I see you as a rising star in the legal energy industry, and I hope we get to chat again soon.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Laurel.
Thank you for joining us today. And Josh, great job. I would echo Laurel's assessment that you are a rising star here. So we appreciate you stepping in as a guest host. And of course, Laurel, very nice to have you on our program. We appreciate you sharing as much as you did about Duke's plans and your team's plans, and a lot of interesting development within Duke on this issue. So, and a lot of themes I think that you hit on that are sort of echoed in a lot of other episodes. So we really appreciate the time today.
Copyright Troutman Pepper Hamilton Sanders, LLP. These recorded materials are designed for educational purposes only. This podcast is not legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individual participants. Troutman Pepper does not make any representations or warranties, express or implied, regarding the contents of this podcast. Information on previous case results does not guarantee a similar future result. Users of this podcast may save and use the podcast only for personal or other non-commercial educational purposes. No other use, including, without limitation, reproduction, retransmission, or editing of this podcast may be made without the prior written permission of Troutman Pepper. If you have any questions, please contact us at troutman.com.